Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here at Keytos for our webinar today. We're going to talk to you a little bit about detecting and mitigating insider threats. My name is Danielle Patterson. I'm in business development here at Keytos. Egal, please introduce
Hey,
yourself.
I'm Miguel Flagman, and as Danielle, I'm very excited to talk about insider threat. So, Danielle, take us over about how has it increased since COVID?
Okay, so we know COVID changed the entirety of our work lives, right? So we went from primarily in office based to mostly fully remote positions and basically overnight. This means millions of employees in the workforce are now working strictly straight from home. We also know with COVID, there were a ton of layoffs and furloughs, which also, grows the amount of potentially unhappy former employees or current employees, which is going to increase the risk of insider threat as well. So we know that since COVID, we've had insider events raised over 44% in the past 2 years. So we know that IT teams that were already pretty overtaxed and running lean had very little time to prepare and harden security for a remote work environment as well. So all of these factors contributed to quite the storm, and that's why we're seeing this drastic raise in insider threat events occurring.
Huh. Yeah, and it's important that it's something that it's so hard, and I'll talk about a little bit about the two flavors of insider threat, but it's so hard to catch just because it's an insider, like insiders are supposed to have that access. So it's very hard to kind of detect, and we'll cover a little bit more in a few minutes. But there's two types of insider threat: the unintentional events and the malicious insider. So in intentional events, it's based on human error, and it's a little bit unavoidable. We'll talk about how it can be prevented. And it's the most widespread. This is someone posting the password on GitHub and then someone else using it, and it's usually the least expensive. What is $300,000? Which I know we were joking about it when we were making this presentation. That like
Drop in the bucket,
it's
right?
it's only $300,000. No big deal, but it's big. I mean, it's not the same as the 4 million that is usually the cost of a breach, but still a big thing to happen just by a little mistake. And then there's the
Absolutely.
malicious insider. So this is the one that you talked about, of having someone actively be stealing information to sell it on the web or something like that. And it is the most difficult to detect because they're actually trying to hide their tracks. And it's also the most expensive just because, as well, they're trying to damage. And with also another thing with the unintentional ones, now that we're home, there's this unintentional of like maybe giving your kid the computer and them using it,
Yep.
or like being in.
Your hobby hopping on for 45 minutes or, yep.
Yeah. So that's another thing that kind of increased with COVID, that it's like you're no longer in that secure network, and that it's controlled by your IT team. Now you're at home with smart devices, Alexas, and everything, which really increases your surface area. And Danielle, I don't know if you want to talk a
Absolutely.
little bit about the ones that have happened in the past few months.
Yeah, so I mean, these events are real. They happen. They cost companies tons of money. And these are just the recent ones. We're looking at GE, Twitter, Cisco. No company out there is really overtly prepared to deal with the level of increase in insider threats right now.
And one of the cool things that I liked about the ones you chose is, for example, you have Cisco. That one was an ex-employee being mad, and like there was no life cycle
Yep.
account to kick him out of the service. And then there's a Twitter one that it was a customer service agent making a mistake, giving the password, and then people using those tools. So it really covers the intentional and unintentional ones.
Runs the gamut. Absolutely.
So
So
yeah, please walk us through kind of like what's the problems that arise with this, the impact on the
yeah,
business.
so there are tangible impacts to your business when you suffer from an insider threat event, be it unintentional or fully intentional. So we know that you could lose critical business data that you're required to keep safe, right? We know if you do have a breach of that magnitude, that there is legal liability on the other end. And there's going to have to be reparations made to the folks whose data was lost or stolen. Then we have to think about the cost of remediating that type of breach or leak, right? And preventing them in the future. And in addition to that, it's going to damage your brand name. You know, specifically thinking about all those companies, recent companies that have suffered from an insider threat event. These are tech companies. Nobody is immune here. That hurts and damages your brand every time you suffer from one of these events. Um, and then think about the outages and what that means to your bottom line when your customers or customer base doesn't have access to your marketplace, right? And then there are companies that are going to be more proactive in hardening or preventing against these attacks. And those competitors are going to be more than happy to take over, the customers that you lose after an event like this.
Yes, and it's important. And in this case, not every press is good press. If
True.
if you're getting hacked, is not the best press out there.
No, certainly it's not.
And let's talk about why. So it's such a big deal. It's such a big problem. Over 65% of CISOs say that it's their biggest worry, but over 50% of companies don't have a plan for it. And the reason for it, as I mentioned earlier, it's just because it's very hard. Like there is no one product that is like, hey, use this tool and no more insider threat. It's it
Set it and forget it,
yeah,
right?
it's very hard to kind of protect against insider threat because, as I said, like engineers need that access and like customer support agents need that access. So we have to come up with different kind of steps and solutions as an overall design rather than one single thing that says, hey, click this button and no longer insider threat. And let's go over the top four steps that we have for preventing insider threat. So
Absolutely. So we know, as you pointed out with the issues, there is no single solution out there. So companies are really faced with the task of strategically choosing security solutions to meet their unique needs. But as a corporate entity or a CISO, it's so important that you have that single source of truth, right? You need to ensure that whatever tools that you put in your toolbox, it's going to integrate with your SIEM system.
yeah, and that one is very important because an engineer logging into a service, it's not an alert, but an engineer logging into 200 services and downloading a bunch of data, that's an abnormality. So it's those little things that connecting every single piece of your system to a unified place will give you that ability to create those alerts. And even like a lot of these teams have AI powered detection, so they'll find that abnormalities and they'll let you know so you can do something about it.
Absolutely. And again, we're looking at efficiency gains because you're able to work out of one centralized hub for all of your needs there. We also know that whatever tools you choose to harden or strengthen security, they need to be easy for your end users to implement and use on a daily basis. We know, from like an engineer perspective, these folks, they're not focused on security processes and protocols. They want to execute their work for the day. If whatever tool you've implemented is harder, it makes it harder for them to do their work, it's not going to be a successful rollout. So ease of use is very important there. And then we've also got to look at those super critical infrastructure aspects. And you need tools that allow dual key access and these very manual reviewed access to environments that you cannot afford to have somebody out there playing in on the regular, right?
Yeah,
And with this, go ahead.
and it's very important. The dual key, it's not only a compliance requirement for many compliance like FedRAMP High and like PCI.
Hmm.
It's also a great way to also, as we're gonna jump into, remove the human factor. So like when you have a dual key approval, you first of all have that requirement of someone like calling another engineer and be like, hey, like I'm Igal, like I do need access to this service. And it also starts that conversation of, do you really need access to the database? Like, should you really be looking at that customer data, or should we create an API that allows you to do the function, specifically the function you need to do to migrate that database? And that kind of like brings us into the remove the human factor. And that's something we have always advocated at Keytos is humans shouldn't touch production. Production should be code based run. It should be all infrastructure as code. And if it also, it not only helps you reduce your costs of engineering by not having engineers wasting time in production, it also improves your availability and your security by having automatic things like auto heal and other features that will let your infrastructure be more available and more secure, and letting your engineers do what they do best, which is create products and improve your user experience.
And I think you've really hit it on the head there, Eagle. If, a company or an entity or a CISO are making these strategic decisions on tools to put in their toolbox, not only are you implementing processes that are going to do nothing but benefit your business and save you a ton of money that you're going to have to spend if you suffer from one of these insider threat attacks, but it makes your organization more security focused and those conversations easier to have. And at the end of the day, it gives you better work product.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to do my sales thing here because that's my job, Eval. I want to talk specifically about how Keytos fits into your overall security strategy in hardening against these insider threat attacks. So we work on multiple different levels. We are a very proud Microsoft partner, and we have taken focus onto many aspects that we know as a Microsoft partner there might be gaps in functionality for end users. So Easy SSH is our product that really manages Linux security, gives you automated provisioning and just-in-time access, as well as that dual key approval. And it also auto deprovisions, so you don't have credentials stored on critical infrastructure. Makes it no brainer. We
And
also,
what
for code repositories, sorry, Egal, did you want to say
Yeah,
something?
one quick thing about Easy SSH, because you mentioned that we're a Microsoft partner, and that's, I mean, we're really proud about that. But the cool part about Easy SSH is that it works with any Linux machine. So it doesn't matter if you're in Azure, you're on premise, you're in AWS, you're using IoT devices, like any Linux machine you can control with Easy SSH, which gives you that central repository of seeing where the user is logging in. And obviously, all our products push everything to your SIEM. So it gives you that visibility of your whole Linux infrastructure.
Absolutely. So let's talk about source code, your intellectual property at work. So we know that on GitHub, there's thousands of keys leaked on the daily, right? So what we do with Easy Git is really lock down, give that conditional access and just-in-time access to your engineers that need it. But we also protect that, repository that you have that's of great value to your corporation or entity. And then I wanted to touch briefly recently, our most recent release product, Easy Monitor, is basically your one-stop shop for SSL management, right? We not only monitor CT logs, but we have over 20, was it 20,
We
Egal?
have over 20, and it's ever growing. Every time anything new comes up, and I know you love saying that it's your SSL expert in your company. So we have our engineers working and reading any vulnerability and even detecting some vulnerabilities that come out, and we report to large companies such as Microsoft. And we will Easy Monitor automatically scans your infrastructure, your certificate logs, your network, and if it detects any vulnerability, it'll let you know. And one of the cool things, it also avoids outages, because we can tell you like, hey, this certificate is going to expire and you haven't renewed it in this specific server. So you should do that in case of because if not, you will have an outage. Which I was actually tweeting about it yesterday. 80% of companies have had an SSL related outage in the last 2 years. So it's something that is really widespread and it's really easy to fix with Easy Monitor. So that's why it's your favorite tool, just because it's so easy and so much value out of it.
Well, and it speaks to scale because we know with SSL certificates, what was manageable in a spreadsheet 7 years ago has likely exploded to managing thousands of certificates, right?
Yeah.
We need to create and implement tools that are able to scale with your business and grow as your SSL certificate database does, right?
Yeah, and that's the perfect segue to Easy CA, which is PKI made easy. So at Keytos, as you saw, like we really love cryptography. I don't know why, but we do. Uh, as most people don't really like it, and we noticed that it's very hard to run a PKI. And nowadays with IoT and the cloud, the as you said, people are now issuing thousands and millions of certificates every year, and that's no longer manageable in a spreadsheet and checking which one is going to expire and automatic and manually rotate it. So as I mentioned before, let's take the human out of the equation and let's automate it. So one of the cool things with EasyCA, certificates are set and forget. So you set where you want to host that certificate. It might be your Azure Key Vault, your AWS KMS, or your IoT device, and EasyCA will automatically renew that certificate and make sure that no outages happened.
That could benefit. I think it's actually over 82% of companies, Eagle.
Eh,
And it's not one outage, but it's more than one outage that they're going to experience as a result of a certificate expiry.
yeah, and it's and the cool thing about it, it also saves you engineering time. You no longer have that engineer that has
True.
that calendar alert being like, oh, I have to renew that certificate. How did I do that? Oh, yeah, I have to go to that document and click through. It's all done. And the cool thing about EasyCA is we meet you wherever you are. So if you already have your ADCS deployment with your HSMs all over the world, we can connect and kind of like modernize your PKI and make it scalable for cloud. And if you're starting a new IoT device project and you need PKI all over the world with very quick certificates and over millions of certificates a second, you can deploy a global footprint with ACCA. And I think we have it down to 7 clicks. So we really make it very easy to run a secure and compliant PKI around the world.
And again, you kind of hit the nail on the head there because, your goal in co-founding and working with our team to develop these awesome tools and products is at the end of the day, our goal is to make it easier for companies and employees to perform their work in a secure manner than it was to do it in the way that they have been doing it for years. That's the unsecure manner, right? So we just want to make it simple and easy for everybody to get safer out there.
Yep. So now we're going to open up for questions.
So I did want to ask you one thing. So I know we
Yep.
kind of talked about like 4 different aspects to focus on that would, obviously help mitigate insider threat events occurring. If I was to ask you what's your top one recommendation that any company, regardless of scale, could do today to reduce their surface area, what is that number one tip you can offer, Ego?
Yeah, I would say it's removing passwords. So removing passwords is the number one way to get into a company. So 99% of breaches include a password somewhere in the attack process. So it might be because humans are not great at saving passwords. It's because everybody selects very easy to guess passwords. So the number one problem that companies have is password management. So if we completely remove passwords, which is part of our mission at Keytos, then you remove the easiest way into a company.
I love that. And passwordless, I feel like it's a buzzword, like,
Yeah.
especially in cybersecurity, it's, you know, the word that you hear all the time. But what, from a company perspective, does this mean? Like, what are the realistic steps to get to a place where passwords are a thing of the past?
So first of all, you have to get rid of passwords in your AD environment. So at Keytos, you don't have a single password. We use our little UV keys here, and we log in with that to
Yep.
access everything. So if you remove that main password that is usually kind of like the keys to the kingdom, you are improving a lot, like a great step forward. But then that doesn't give you access to everything. Like GitHub is still like managed with a different account.
Mm-hmm.
Linux is still managed with a different account. And even service to service is still managed with passwords that people use to communicate. I always give the example of like your front end communicating to billing. Like that
Right.
shouldn't be a password. It's a computer talking to a computer. Use a certificate. Like it's and one of the things is like have those code samples available. Have that infrastructure to make it easier to use a certificate than it is to use a password.
I love that. So it's making the right choices at what, I mean, we both have to admit is pretty much the beginning of many companies, cybersecurity strategy. It's about making smart decisions, putting the right tools in the toolbox.
Yeah.
And also just got to say, we're always here and happy to help.
Yeah. So if you want to learn more, like book a meeting with one of our experts, and we're happy to just sit down with you and see your infrastructure and see how you can improve it. We're, like obviously Danielle will be trying to sell, but us in like if we will also want to help. Like we love helping companies. We have open source projects to help companies become passwordless, and our whole goal is to make it easier for everybody to be secure. And it actually like hurt us to see attacks on companies, and you're like, well, like if only they would have talked to us, they wouldn't have
Right.
compromised their SSH keys, or they wouldn't have had their code leaked. And it's just like it's so simple in our eyes to fix some of those problems, and it just starts with a small conversation.
Absolutely. So, want to thank everybody for joining us and watching today. Again, please reach out to us if you want to learn more, or if you just have any questions surrounding your cybersecurity plan or journey, insider threat related or not. We're here to help.
Yeah, thank you so much, and have a great day.